Hello, good afternoon, and welcome back to the brutal capitalist dictatorship of Kuala Lumpur. I hope you're having an amazing day, because if you're having an amazing day, I'm having an amazing day. If I'm having an amazing day, you should also be having an amazing day. Okay, I'm at the Setia Wok Puchong cinema right now, and I'm about to watch the most controversial, talked about film of the year, Oppenheimer, right? In 5 minutes, I'm going to walk in and take myself out on a date to watch Oppenheimer because, it's not something you would take a member of the opposite sex to watch, It's not exactly the type of movie you'd like to take a member of the opposite sex to if you're a man, right? But what interested me in this film was really, because the fact that, Oppenheimer is not just the father of the atomic bomb. He was, in the McCarthy era, one of the most prominent, although underground American socialists, right? So I'm looking forward to this movie and I'm going to give you my review on it, right? So I'm going in right now. Take care. I'll come out in about 3 hours. Yeah. Well, that was an epic masterpiece of explosive proportions. Truly, truly the bomb. That was a really, really masterful film. I can't wait to get home and review it. So what do I think of Christopher Nolan's latest historical biopic, Oppenheimer? In a word, spectacular. I think that Nolan has once again outdone himself, and Nolan is really no stranger to excellence, having produced the latest Batman franchise, as well as really, really memorable films such as Interstellar and Inception, right? Nolan has once again outdone himself with possibly the best film of the year, if not the best film of the decade. I think it's not an understatement to say that Christopher Nolan is the greatest living Hollywood producer and has been the greatest Hollywood producer in all history, and his films will go down the ages for centuries, right? And Oppenheimer is perhaps his magnum opus, the greatest film he will ever produce, right? And I'm not one to sing praises lightly, yeah? Those 3 hours were not, as I had expected, 3 wasted hours. They were not 3 hours of wasted time, but rather 3 hours at the edge of my seat. Quite literally. It's one of the most thrilling, riveting, and groundbreaking Hollywood films ever produced, right? In fact, although I don't think that Christopher Nolan has ever produced a disappointing movie, I'm really, 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 really taken away by Oppenheimer. I think the producer has really outdone himself. The master has outdone his last masterpiece, and Oppenheimer will go down in history as one of the most impactful films of the 21st century. So in a nutshell, the film Oppenheimer is of course about a man named Robert Oppenheimer, the Jewish American physicist who is famous for the creation of the atomic bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. Oppenheimer is also famous for that clip of him reciting a verse from the Hindu scripture Bhagavad Gita, in which he says, "I am become death, destroyer of worlds." Now, this film, although 3 hours long, does not feel like 3 hours. It feels more like an hour and a half, because time really, really flies by when you're watching a good film. And as I've said, Oppenheimer was a masterpiece. And the actor who plays Oppenheimer, Cillian Murphy, the Irish actor, truly, well and truly deserves the Best Actor Academy Award for his performance. Because no one, I don't think anyone, else could have played Oppenheimer to the letter and replicated not only his dress, his appearance, his mannerisms, but also his distinct transatlantic American accent. No other actor, I think, could have really nailed the role as well as Cillian Murphy, and it really felt as if you were basically watching a live action version. Let me put it this way, a real life version of Oppenheimer. It was so convincing that you felt you were actually watching Oppenheimer live on camera, simply put. So I do hope that Cillian Murphy wins the Best Actor Academy Award. He really has worked very, very, very hard for it. You know, he apparently only ate one almond a day, you know, in order to get that skinny frame of Oppenheimer, who quite literally survived on a liquid diet, you know. He drank alcohol and smoked cigarettes, and that was his nourishment for the day. So in order to prepare himself for the role, Murphy really went to extreme lengths, right? Not only mimicking his accent, but also mimicking his physical form, right? So in terms of historical authenticity, visual effects, and audio effects, spectacular. I'm not gonna really talk about all these things, because it's a given that Christopher Nolan's imagery, the imagery that Christopher Nolan creates in his films, is going to be spectacular. He never disappoints. Now, as for the plot, I will admit that the plot isn't exactly layman friendly, right? It's not one of those easy to understand, easy to appreciate plots like Barbie or any other film that you might watch, because Oppenheimer is actually a highly political film, right? So, as I expected, the Malaysian audience was, chattering among themselves. All around me I could hear chattering of people trying to explain the plot to each other, and I fear that I might have been the only one in the cinema who actually had some idea of what was going on, because the film is told through a series of flashbacks, right? The film starts in 1954, 11 years before Oppenheimer's death, 1954, when he's being interrogated by the FBI, right? The Federal Bureau of Investigation. And it's told through a series of flashbacks from his student days all the way to the Manhattan Project, in which he builds the atomic bomb, right? And basically he's being interrogated as a suspected communist due to his left-wing sympathies, as well as his associations with people in the Communist Party. And as you know, communism is a dirty word in Malaysia, so the audience was basically quite confused as to why he was being interrogated. Like, what's going on with this guy? Most Malaysians have never heard of the word McCarthy. They don't know what the McCarthy era was. They certainly do not know what McCarthyism is, because simply put, Malaysia itself is a brutal capitalist dictatorship in which communism is not looked upon favorably by the authorities, right? So people were kind of confused as to why he was sitting in a room getting interrogated by American Secret Service agents, right? So it's not an easy plot to follow, because it's full of political jargon, and you have to be aware of the post-World War II as well as pre-war, Cold War dynamics in order to truly appreciate the plot of Oppenheimer. And you really, really need to pay attention, because the film is not shot in a linear fashion. The film jumps all over the place, right, in his life. So, as with most of Christopher Nolan's movies, the plot is complex. And it's not one of those simplistic American action films that is easily digestible. In fact, I may actually watch it again in order to fully appreciate the plot, but I'm not sure I want to spend another 3 hours of my life rewatching a movie, you know. I don't even replay video games, even if the replay value is high, because I don't like repetition, simply put, right? I like novelty, because I'm a brutally brainwashed capitalist drone who, you know, whose only meaning in life is to be found in the in seeking out novelty. But anyway, I will rewatch Oppenheimer to get a second interpretation sometime, and I may talk about it again in a later video. But yeah, overall, I did enjoy it very much, and although the plot was not an easy plot to follow, I really did find that movie to be spectacular. You know what sets Oppenheimer apart from other historical biopics is that most historical biopics tend to treat the subject in question with a certain reverence, as if he or she were some kind of a saint who cannot be criticized, right? Whereas Oppenheimer, to me, is one of the most candid, nuanced, and balanced historical biopics that neither vilifies nor portrays the protagonist as some kind of a saint, you know. Yeah, most historical biopics have the tendency to hero worship, basically treating the subject in question as if they were some godlike, infallible creature who simply cannot be criticized, right? I mean, can you imagine a biographical film about Chairman Mao exposing the inconvenient facts about Chairman Mao's spicy life? No, it wouldn't, because, well, historical biopics usually, not always, but usually serve as a form of hero worship, right? But thankfully, Oppenheimer does not fall into that trap, even though it would have been much easier and far less controversial in order to simply fall into the trap of hero worship. No, Oppenheimer is portrayed as a complex man with complex motivations and a complex personality. And the inconvenient facts of his life are not censored. Quite literally not censored, you know. I don't think it's a spoiler to say that he had an affair with a married man's wife, whom he in turn turned into his own wife. It's not a spoiler to say that, because it's a historical fact. And Oppenheimer does not pull punches. The film Oppenheimer really does not pull punches into the darker aspects of the man's life. And it doesn't portray him as some, you know, do-gooder pacifist who basically was vehemently against the use of the bomb. No, he wasn't some pacifist who was pleading with the President of America not to use the bomb, because the film is honest. It shows a man who was reluctantly agreeing to the devastating use of his atomic bomb, which he believed to be a utilitarian sacrifice. You know, the deaths of a couple of thousand in order to save the lives of millions, right? So he wasn't an angel, he wasn't a saint, he was a complex man. And, you know, the film really does a good job at portraying his life in a very nuanced but balanced manner. And yes, although Christopher Nolan's films do have a reputation for having a right-wing slant, I think Oppenheimer is really his saving grace, because it is not only balanced and nuanced, but it does not portray America as being some bastion of leftism or some savior of the world. And it really shines a light on the virulent anti-communism that has occurred in America, and basically, you know, is basically the nature, the very nature of American politics. Yes, so it doesn't exactly, you know, sugarcoat the reality of how fascist America is in actual fact, right? It's a Hollywood film, no doubt, but it's one of those films that doesn't tippy-toe to avoid offending American sensitivities. And it's an important film for all of us to watch because it basically warns us of the devastating effect of nuclear weapons, the devastating effect that can be unleashed upon humanity. It is a cautionary tale, basically, warning us of the danger that nuclear weapons can pose, not only to our enemies, but also to ourselves and our own existential survival. Yes, as Einstein said, human beings created the atomic bomb, but no mouse would ever deign to create a mousetrap, right? So, Oppenheimer really does not pull punches on the devastating effects of nuclear war, right? And I think it's meant to serve as a warning for future generations on how nuclear deterrence may not be the best course of action. If you build a bomb today, someone else may build a bigger bomb tomorrow. So it is quite an important film in that regard. And I think that film also really portrays the tragedy of the human species in a compelling way, because human beings like to think of themselves as being the heroes in their own story, right? And America is basically the country with the biggest hero complex in the world, right? So the Americans have always believed that they are the ones who will keep the world in order, right? The Americans have always believed, for instance, that they will be the ones to fight the war that will end all wars. They believed it in the American Revolution. They believed it in World War I, which they called the Great War, which was supposed to be the war to end all wars. And they believed that the atomic bomb would finally put an end to all wars. But basically, in retrospect, you know that that's nonsense, right? You know that you cannot end all war through devastation. You cannot end war through war, right? So this film is also a cautionary film in the sense that, violence only begets more violence, right? The nuclear bomb that exploded and created a divide between East and West after World War II certainly did not put a stop to all wars, right? And it basically it's a film that I think should humble Americans, basically, and make them realize that, they cannot do everything in the world, least of all stop all wars. It's a film, I think, that not only tells an honest and compelling, gives us an honest and compelling insight into a complex man's life, but it's a film, I think, that should also humble the Americans, right? And show the Americans just how devastating an impact their decisions can have on the world, and just, how the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right? So yeah, that's about it for today, and I really hope that you watch Oppenheimer, even if you're not a big fan of nuclear physics, I found the science jargon in the film quite impossible to understand, because I was an art student, right? So yeah, anyway, watch it. It's not layman friendly. I cannot guarantee that you'll be able to appreciate the plot 100%, But it is nevertheless a groundbreaking, riveting film that may change my opinion on Hollywood, you know. What I mean to say is that I am reconsidering my opinion on Hollywood, because at one point I used to think that all films that came out of Hollywood except Christopher Nolan's films were garbage. But if Hollywood can produce more films like this, you know, instead of all that nonsensical trash that it usually produces, I think that I would have a better opinion of Hollywood, right? Alright, well, I'm done with my rambling today, so I just want you to leave a comment, if you will, and if you will do me a favor, please do subscribe to my YouTube channel. It really, really helps, you know, but if you've already subscribed, thank you very much, and I would appreciate if you left a comment. Yeah, so if you have seen Oppenheimer, what do you think of it? Do you agree with my review? Or if you haven't seen it, well, do you plan to watch it? Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone, and have a lovely day. Take care.